Welcome to part 2 of the code tutorial walkthrough for the Django web framework. In the previous video, we done part 1 of the tutorial, which is that. This time we're gonna do part 2, okay? And here we're gonna do some database setup. If you want to use a database such as PostgreSQL or Oracle or MySQL, or MariaDB, you can set that up. Or if you just want to use SQLite, which just comes bundled with the Django framework itself, you can also do that. Then you don't have to do anything. I'm gonna choose the not do anything option and use SQLite. I'm familiar with SQLite myself. I'm also familiar with PostgreSQL. Perhaps later on, I might show how to switch the database vendor. But for now, I'm gonna stick with SQLite. But having said that, I'm going to open up the settings.py. So my site.settings.py, my project is called Django Tut. So I would find it under Django Tut settings py. There's a time zone that might matter for certain databases, but it's the engine. There we go. So for databases, we can change what the default is, I guess. You can also have multiple databases configured. But the default currently is SQLite 3. So if I wanted to change it to, say, PostgreSQL, I could just change this like that. But if I had changed it like that, I would need to put in some other configuration specifically for PostgreSQL as well. But at the moment, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to stick with SQLite. Okay, so I'm going to stick with SQLite, and we're going to actually perform this migrate command. And what is migrate? Let's talk about that. Why are we migrating? The term migrate means we're migrating from an older version of the application's database to a newer version. A newer version of the application's database. So you might imagine your old version of the database. So I'm gonna call it V1. Maybe the first version of your application, maybe it supports users. Maybe it supports projects. I don't know. Maybe this is a project management application, and that's it. But maybe V2 version 2, a newer version of your application. Maybe you support more than that. You support users, projects, but in addition to that, maybe your project's got additional fields in it. So like maybe version 1, it has project ID, project name, and in the next version you have project ID, name, and description. And maybe you also have additional tables as well. Maybe you added another table called, I don't know, badges, because every app has to have badges. If that was the case, then what you would end up doing is basically you have certain things that are different, certain changes you made to the database, which your version 2 has that your version 1 does not. And what migrate does is takes a version 1 database and migrates it to version 2. And in particular, what it'll do is add the bits that were added in the updating of from version 1 to version 2. So that's what migrate conceptually does. Let's actually perform this command and actually see what it does. I hope I explained that okay. So it actually has applied a whole bunch of things, a whole bunch of migrations. So each one of these lines is a migration. And I believe there are actually files, although I don't see them in my project. Let me see. Do I have migration files? No, I don't. So these must be like default migration files that are internal to Django, but are not in my project. But these are like default things that every Django application has. It has users, rows, a bunch of stuff that come right out of the box for Django. In particular, Django has this admin functionality, which we'll see later. And I bet most of these are used for that functionality. But we'll see that later. But essentially what it did, though, was actually create some database tables in our database. And since our database is currently a SQLite database, I do want to give a shout out to SQLite because in my opinion, SQLite is an awesome project and I have used it with success on other projects that I am working on. So, and Django bundles SQLite within itself. And so, and you can see that when after this migration happened, we basically brought a database from version 0 to version 1 now, where version 0 didn't even have anything. We've migrated a non-existent database to a version 1 database that actually has tables in it, and those tables are in here, in this SQLite 3 database. And this db.sqlite 3 is a file, but it's a file that contains everything that database needs, and we can actually take a look inside that database. You can, if you have SQLite installed, you can do this. And if you don't have SQLite installed, you can install SQLite and then do this. Okay. So I'm gonna do SQLite 3, db.sqlite 3. And then we're in this database and you can see all of the tables. So I can use the corresponding command depending on which database. I'm using SQLite, so I should use .tables to see what tables exist here. Okay, so these are all the tables that exist. And yeah, we have Django session, Django migrations. Oh, I can probably select from Django migrations to see what migrations are there. And these are all the migrations that got applied to this database. And what other things can we look at here? We can maybe look at the auth users. There are no auth users at the moment. Okay. There's another cool SQLite tool that I have installed for, this is Mac only, however. It's called DB Browser for SQLite. So if you're on Mac, you can use this. If you're not on Mac, I'm pretty sure there are comparable tools like this for Windows or Linux, but I'm using Mac, so I use this. So what I can do is open up a database and I can navigate to oops. Navigate to this SQLite 3 database file and open it up. And now I have a GUI, a graphical user interface with which to look at the different tables, look at the table structures, and I can also browse the data within these tables. Like this. So this is the migrations table, which probably is one of the few. Oh, we also have these rows. Are these? Oh, these are Django content types. There aren't a lot of data in here. Oh, there's auth permission. There's all these permissions seeded already in the database. So you can take a look around if you're curious at what Django has created as its basically starter database. Okay. And for minimalists, so some people may not want all this stuff created. It's like, what is all this? Do I really need it? Is it really useful to me? If you don't want all these things created, you can actually turn them off if you want. So in this settings.py file, there's a variable called installed apps. And these are all the apps. These are all the apps that are installed, and they come from this Django contrib module. And I would assume that all of these are basically for the purpose of serving up the Django admin app, which you will see later. And if you think you don't need the Django admin app, you can by all means delete all of these, and then it wouldn't have created all of those tables that we saw. But I'm going to keep that around. You'll see the powerfulness of the Django admin app in a bit. Okay, now we're going to create some database models. Which essentially defines your database layout with some additional metadata. And the philosophy of Django is a model is the single definitive source of information about your data. It contains the essential fields and behavior of the data that you're storing. Django follows the dry principle. The goal is to define your data model in one place and automatically derive things from it. This includes the migrations. Unlike Ruby on Rails, for example, migrations in Ruby on Rails, I believe you developers are expected to hand code migrations, whereas in Django, the migrations are automatically generated based on the difference of your model from the previous version of the model. I believe that's the difference that they are highlighting. Okay, so we're going to create a couple of models. I'm going to go into our polls application and open up the models.py file. And here we want to create two models, the question model and the choice model. So I'm going to type these in. And if it's a model, then it has to inherit from a models.model, where models is a django.db.model. And here in the class scope, we type in a bunch of fields. Okay, this is actually a foreign key. that points from the choice table to the question table. So yeah, each model will end up becoming a database table, and a foreign key is a pointer from one table, in this case choice, to another table, in this case question. And I'm not gonna go into too much detail about relational databases. I unfortunately, because that could be a whole separate course. And in this video, I'm not prepared to give that. Default equals 0. Okay, so we have two models, aka two tables, and each model has a bunch of fields, aka columns. so yeah, so it's like there's ORM speak, ORM terminology versus SQL terminology, or a relational terminology. So in ORM speak, we have models, but in SQL we just call them tables. In ORM we have fields, and in SQL we have columns. Okay, so this is how the terms translate, but essentially they mean the same thing. Each field is represented by an instance of a field class. So a char field is a field, a datetime field is a field, and even a foreign key is a field. There will end up being a translation from this field object to an actual database column, and the data type on the column is actually determined by what kind of field it is and what kind of parameters you gave to the definition of the field. And you can further configure it like this on delete cascade. It ends up getting translated to a database constraint that says when you delete a choice object, you should also delete the question, maybe, or is it the other way around? I think it might be the other way around, where if the parent question, so like a question and a choice would be like, hey, what is 1 plus 1, and then you have choices A, 1, B, 2, C is 3. Let's say, so this is the question, and this is choice 1, choice 2, choice 3. This cascade on delete means if this question gets deleted from the database, we're going to cascade the delete and delete all three of the choices that are related to this question, because we're going to have this choice that points, all three of these choices had a parent of this question, and their existence is no longer meaningful after their parent question goes away. So so that's what a cascading delete means, as far as I understand it. And then this is a char field, is just a string field, and then a vote, this is an integer field, and we also have a date field here. Okay, so let's activate these models. So we're gonna turn these model definitions into actual database tables, and the way to do that is what is it? I'll give you a minute. I'll give you a second to come up with the answer. The answer is migrate. We're gonna use migrate, to actually bring the application from version number 1 of the database that doesn't have a question table and doesn't have a choice table to version 2, which does have these tables. So, before we do that though, we have to go to the settings .py and add our polls app to our list of installed apps. So if we go to our polls apps, it's here. So there's this polls config, which apparently we need to include in here. And that's what's needed for this migration thing to work. And now we're going to run make migration. Before we actually run the migrate command, we actually need to make the migrations first for the migrate to have some migrations to migrate. And we'll look at what those migrations actually look like. Okay, so we're gonna do this command, Python manage py make migrations polls. We're just gonna make the migrations for the polls application. And that's our migration that it created. Basically, it's a description of what we're going to do to the database if we bring the database from the previous version to this one. And those operations are, we're going to create a model. It's going to have the model's name is question, and it's going to have these fields. We're going to create another model called choice, and it has these fields. That's what this migration is going to do. Now that we have this migration, we can migrate. It's telling us this command is not necessary, but it's a instructive. It's for educational purposes. So I'll do that for educational purposes because this video is educational in nature. So I'm gonna run SQL migrate polls 001, and this will actually show you what the SQL statements look like when we translate this initial migration, this 0001 migration, to get the database to do these things, create these two models. We're gonna need to create a table called polls underscore question. So the table names are kind of name-spaced by the app name. So in this case, polls. And these are all the fields that are going to exist in this polls question table. And then we'll also create the polls choice table as well with all of its fields. And all of these is written in a SQL, the SQLite dialect of SQL. And it's going to work on our database if we run this SQL directly on the database. But it hasn't done it yet. It's showing you what it's going to do when you actually migrate, which should be the next thing we do now. Yeah, let's go ahead and do that. And it's written, it's going through all the SQL in detail, which I'm not going to bother doing. I'm just going to go right ahead and migrate. Okay, so this should, so it has applied this migration, and that those tables should be in my database now. So I'm gonna go ahead to my database browser for SQLite again, and I'm gonna open up that same database, and now it has a polls choice table. It has ID, choice text, votes, question ID, and the polls question table as well. It has 3 fields. One thing to mention is these migration files, you're expected to check them into your source control and code review them as well if you're working in a team. Okay, now we're gonna explore the shell. So the Django framework gives you this very nice and nifty and convenient interactive shell, interactive Python shell, which is similar to what happens when you type Python. You can just type Python code and it'll hit enter and it'll execute the code. This is also called a REPL, read eval print loop. So read eval print loop REPL. This is what it is. We're gonna have one for Django. So and this is how you do it. You do Python manage.py and then shell, and now you have a shell, but with access to the internals of your Django application. So one thing you can do is you can say from polls.models import your models, choice and question. Okay, you can say question.objects all, and that queries for all the question objects, but currently we don't have any. We could create them though. So this is saying we're gonna import the time zone, or the time zone module, so we can create a new question object with this question text, what's new question, and the publish date, we're gonna set that to timezone.now. And then I have a question object now. Okay, that's a representation of the time zone object, and we're gonna save that time zone object, and presumably now it's in the database. And if I go question dot what was it? Question dot objects dot all. Now we get that back, and also if I go into my database browser and I go into the question table, I can actually see there's data in there, and this is what I just created. So that's very cool. The code is interactive, and I can interact with the database directly using Django's data model classes. It is saying it's not so nice, like this representation, this text representation of a question object is not super helpful. So what we could do is add these override methods, the dunder string methods, and have it return the text of the question. And if we did that, then the representation of the question would be shown directly here in the shell. So let's go ahead and do that. I thought it was repr, but they're saying to use dunder string. I might try repr as well. Okay, so for the question, we're gonna use the sort of text of the question and show it. For the choice, we're gonna show the choice text. And now, if I run this, I might have to restart the shell to get it to. Okay, I'm gonna get back the models and say question.objects.all. Objects plural. Now it says question : what's new. Cool. I wonder if I did repr instead of string, will it work? Try it again. If I do repr, then I see it doesn't put question : in front of it. I see. Okay. All right, I'll go back to the string just to do it the Django way. So this is saying we can also add a method to the question class, and then that adds more functionality to the class. So let's do that as a test. This is saying my published date, if it's greater than now, minus 1 day. Okay, if it's published, it is published within 24 hours, then it was published recently. So if you do this, and then we go back to the shell, it's like question.objects.all. I would assume you can get at the 0th element of the query set. Yeah, so I'll call this Q. So this is the Q is the question. I can ask, hey, were you published recently? And this is a method, so I use the parentheses to call it. Oh, time zone is not defined. I forgot to define time zone. I need to import time zone. So from Django.utils, I'll import time zone, and we'll also need to import date time as well, apparently. Try one more time. So quit out of the shell, go back into it, import the models, query for the question. There's the question, and now were you published recently? True. Beautiful. That's what I was expecting. And if I changed it, maybe changed it to January here, and then I saved it. Can I save it? And then now I do it again. False. Yeah, so that works. Okay. Next. You can also, there are other methods. So let me show those. So you can get a object by filtering on a particular column, and the ID is a common one to use for that. So question.objects.get ID equals 1, and then you would get that. You can probably also filter on any field, maybe question text equals what's new. No. Question that I used to write what's new. Question text equals what's new. Oh, question mark. I forgot the question mark. So that worked, yeah. So you can query based on any field of the table. And if it doesn't find it, then it'll say, it'll throw an error saying like, it'll throw an error that does not exist error. Question matching query does not exist. That the same thing would happen if you queried by ID, I imagine. So if I query for ID 1, we find that one question in our database. If we query for ID number 2, then we get a does not exist. You could also use PK as a special field that means the ID. Although I'm sure you can change the primary key to something else if you wanted to. You probably need to configure the model differently. You can also do this create. Choice set. Oh, interesting. So this, I have a question and I actually have a choice set. dot all. I mean, these are all my choices, but I could create a choice object via the question object by saying choice set dot create. What's new? Not much. Okay. And then votes equals 0. And then we have created a choice. Did it get into the database yet, or do I have to save it? It did already go into the database. Okay. And I can choice create what's new, my hat. Okay. And now that went into the database as well. Cool. And then this, okay, this is pretty nifty to have this choice set. I mean, you could also query for the choices via the choice class, choice.objects.all, and then you have all the choice objects that I've created. In this way, you query for them at a global level instead of having them hang off of this question object. It's a very cool API. You could also delete stuff, obviously. So like maybe I'll get the 0th choice. C, not much. I'm gonna delete that. You can do that, and then if I go check in the database, it's gone now. Okay, now let's talk about the Django admin. So Django admin is a very powerful feature of Django. It's one of its very strong selling points, actually. Django was written in a newsroom environment. Like Django initially was created in a news publishing company, and basically the content publishers had to modify what would eventually get published in the next issue constantly. So this Django admin allows non-developers to do that. So it has a full sort of CRUD interface that allows you to edit the database data, which you could also do with a database editing GUI editing tool like this, but the Django admin tool allows you to do that, and it has a bit of a more user-friendly user interface. So let's see it. So, but first we need to create a super user before we can do that. So let's do that. So Python manage.py, create super user. Airport YH is my username, so I'm gonna just use that, and I'm gonna use my email address, my super secret password. Okay, and it has created the super user successfully, and you can actually see this in the database. Auth user, that's me. That's well, you can't. That's my super secret password hashed, and this is my user information. Went into the database, and now I can start the development server just like I did previously, but this time I'm going to go to the admin page, which I can, instead of typing in polls in the address bar, I can type in admin like that, and I get this, and now I can log in using the credential that I just created. It's already been auto-filled for me. I'm gonna log in, and now I have this pretty nice looking, pretty kick-ass looking user interface that allows me to edit certain database tables using a very intuitive user interface. So for example, I can add a user. Maybe I'll that user named Marty. And now save it. Oh, the password is too common. Okay, I don't feel like dealing with this. So, but anyway, you can edit. You can edit the database table. Maybe it'll be easier if I show editing our question and choice tables. Which let's go ahead and do that actually. So notice that we don't get the question and choice tables here, but we can change that easily by registering our question and choice tables. Here is saying let's register the question table into polls/admin.py. I'm gonna do both of them. Okay. So from .models, import question and choice. Admin.site register question, and I'm gonna also register choice so that both of them come up in our admin site. I don't think you even have to restart the server. So I'm going back to the site, and now I have questions and choices, and I can add a question. Question, hey, what's for dinner? And I just put today and now. Save. So I have another question called what's for dinner. Okay. I can also go into choices and add a choice, and I can say what's for dinner, and my choice is fried chicken. Save and add another. Lasagna. Is that how you use it? Yeah. Save. Okay, so now I have a few choices in there. So yeah, so this is like a full-fledged CRUD interface. CRUD standing for create. When I say CRUD, I mean create, retrieve, update, and delete. So whereas in the Ruby on Rails web framework, there's a scaffolding functionality to quickly get your site for any particular model to look like this. In Django, you're basically, this is more full featured, and it exists in addition to customizations rather than in lieu of the customizations. So okay, so I think we're gonna stop there for part 2.